market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Well, good morning and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, shares have rallied after the BOJ's deputy governor have said they won't raise interest rates if markets are unstable. Let's bring in Morris-Eyton, portfolio manager for European and global growth at AllianceBernstein and Bloomberg's Justina Lee. So thank you, Marcus, for joining us. Justina, what a week. It's only Wednesday. It feels like it's been like a month and a half. Finally, a little bit more stability, but we still haven't recouped all of those losses.
Yeah, no, we haven't. And I think it really shows that, it's not just about the BOJ. It's also about how quickly the narrative has changed in terms of the U.S. economy. From bad news is good news to bad news really is bad news. And I think people are kind of adjusting to the reality that the U.S. economy is slowing, even if I think that people are now kind of waking up to perhaps a recession is not imminent. But, we do need to adjust those expectations regarding AI and regarding where the U.S. economy is going.
Marcus, do you think the reaction or actually the reality has changed somewhat at the margin, partly because of the carry trade, but just partly because now we worry about the Fed not managing a soft landing?
Yeah, what a week indeed. And I think us, along with many investors, were surprised by the extent of the market reaction. Because as Justina said, the market reaction seemed disproportionate to the data released. That said, macro data has been mixed for a while now, and valuations certainly have been rich in parts of the market. So it might be the case of the employment data really being the straw that finally broke the camel's back. Where we stand today, I think our view of the world hasn't fundamentally changed. The world is definitely slowing, but we're very much in the soft landing camp. And the positive we have now is that the valuations have pulled back, and you will certainly see an accelerated easing campaign from many of the central banks across the world.
But, Marcus, at the end of the day, I don't know whether it's volatility, which often happens in August when a lot of people are on holiday, or whether actually it's also traders just trying to adjust for more risk because they were too optimistic before.
I think there's certainly an element of that, and you've seen the move we've seen in markets this year, and as Justina said, investors were very prepared to look through the bad news and almost view bad news as good news, and that narrative has now changed, and when it changes very quickly.
Are we expecting more of these kind of intense volatility? And again, we're still trying to figure out exactly. It was also almost unfortunate that Warren Buffett, that his cutting on Apple by 50% happened on that day where there was already a lot of turmoil. But can we expect these days of massive volatility, or do you think something deeply has changed? Justina?
Well, I think that we're probably not going to see the same degree of volatility that we've been seeing. I mean, one good news from kind of the past few sessions is that on Monday, we actually saw hedge funds buying the dip, according to Goldman Sachs' prime brokerage data. So I think, And then another good thing is also bonds kind of played the role of a hedge here. So at least it's not like your whole portfolio was losing money. And I think that's kind of helped a lot of people hold on to their positions. But I think in terms of the adjustment, were those valuations in U.S. mega cap stocks justified? And I think we still might see a bit of movement there, but not perhaps as dramatic as we've seen in the last few days.
So, Marcus, how do you rebuild your portfolio?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to be selective and pick out opportunities where we feel the move has been disproportionate. And one area of that is in certain semiconductor names. And you've seen a big sell-off in the semiconductor space beyond the last week, in the last 3 weeks. So our largest position is ASML, which I think is probably one of, if not the best positioned companies globally at the moment. The shares are off sort of 25% in the past 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. And actually the earnings picture beyond this year looks incredibly healthy. And they've got a capital markets day in November where they will map out the next few years. So it's a stock that we remain very, very bullish on.
What did you pick out in terms of earnings overall, Justina? Some of them, I'm looking at Novo Nordisk. They got slammed because they disappointed. And I don't know whether it's very difficult for some of these bigger companies that have been top of their game to actually meet market expectations.
Yeah, I think on the aggregate, earnings were not terrible, but I think two things really stood out to investors here. One is, for a lot of the really hyped up names, it seems like a lot of the AI investments are not turning into revenue just yet. Mm-hmm. And that's proving to be a concern for investors at a time when, interest rates are at 5%. Maybe they don't have that patience anymore. And I think another trend is we're really seeing in a lot of these consumer companies that maybe they're not able to charge those high prices as before. Consumer demand is slowing, and even, kind of among the, Pepsi and the like. So it does seem like that trend has been pretty concerning for investors.
Marcus, you mentioned ASML. In general, what do you do with industrial autos? Do you have a good breakdown of some of the industries that you like and don't like?
Yeah, so within semis, actually, you've seen huge divergence between the sort of tech-related semis and, as you say, some of the industrial and autos where the slowdown has been a bit more magnified. And as Justina says, I think the consumer space is one that is concerning because a huge number of the profit warnings we have seen in the quarter, and there haven't been too many, have targeted consumer weakness. And that's particularly in the consumer discretionary areas, so airlines, travel, luxury, and actually autos as well. And what we've seen many companies doing is to try and stimulate consumer demand. They've been offering unusually high promotional or discount activity. And the worry there is that will ultimately feed into margins later down the line.
How much is China's story for luxury? And again, luxury kind of, even the luxury, the stocks that were outperformers have fallen pretty hard in the last 5 months. Yeah,
the luxury story is fascinating because you've got a huge disparagence between the winners and losers in the luxury space at the moment. And actually you've seen the best performing ultra high net worth luxury brands like Hermes still generating double-digit revenue growth. And on the flip side, some of the more aspirational brands like Burberry and Kering, for example, are experiencing double-digit declines. And the problem with luxury companies when they see a top-line slowdown is there's huge negative operating leverage in the system. So actually, Kering's 11% revenue decline equated to a 40% EBIT decline. Yeah. As you said, China is a big issue here, but actually I think many of these luxury brands have been so aggressive in pricing over the last few years that the consumers are having to sort of stop and pause to see whether they can pay these higher prices in a weaker consumer environment.
Justina, what do we know about tactical buying, or how many investors are buying the dip at some of these levels?
Yeah, it does seem like quite a lot of investors are doing it, whether it's like retail and institutional. And I think it speaks to the fact that despite the initial scare Monday morning, at the end of the day, people don't actually think fundamentals have deteriorated to an extent where you need to sell everything. I mean, we talked about kind of hedge funds actually buying the dip on Monday. And I think that's generally been the market color here. And so, we've kind of anecdotally heard about, retail investors complaining about kind of their brokerage apps kind of breaking down, right? And so I think that's kind of been pretty helpful here, and I think that's kind of supporting the rebound.
That does not happen to markets. So you've been tactically buying on the dip?
Around the edges. I mean, we have a very long-term horizon and actually try and benefit from the volatility, and that's one of the beauties of being a long-term investor, that actually fundamentals change a lot less quickly than valuations change. So you can benefit from those.
Okay, BOJ. I mean, this is like the big one. I don't know, do we feel bad for them, Justina, that they're now trying to kind of put plasters on some of the damage?
Yeah, I know. I do feel a little bit bad for them because at the end of the day, it wasn't just them. It was also the U.S. jobs report, Warren Buffett, as you said, and the confluence of all these factors. But you can tell now they're pretty uncomfortable with the market volatility and the surge in the yen. And so what they're saying here is, we're not going to raise rates as long as the markets are this volatile. And I think this kind of is giving a lot of leverage players some breathing space. And of course, a lot of kind of money has probably gone out of these carry trades over the last few days. And so the question still remains. I mean, there are still kind of many months to go by the end of this year. And so are we still going to get one more hike from the BOJ?
So do you think they've now turned dovish? And we've seen some of these dovish signals, or are they just going to telegraph hikes better?
Yeah, I think it's probably more the latter. I mean, they still need to pay attention to their own inflation picture. I mean, the good news about Japan here is they're not really in the position that the Fed was in, a year ago. They don't need to worry as much about being behind the curve here. And so they can afford to wait. But I don't think they want their hands to be tied by the markets at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you both for a terrific briefing. Morris-Eyton there from AllianceBernstein and Bloomberg's Justina Lee. Now, just something that you need to watch out for. Airbnb shares of Airbnb have fallen sharply after a disappointing outlook for a third consecutive quarter, a warning of slowing demand for U.S. travelers. Now, Airbnb says it expects sequential moderation of growth in the key metric of nights and experiences booked in the current period. So you can see Premarket down 16%. Now, shares of Supermicro jumped as much as 18% after hours before falling sharply. Now, the company's quarterly revenue and profit missed estimates, outweighing its annual sales outlook that was billions above Wall Street projections. Investors worried about the long-term profitability of AI-optimized servers sold by companies like Supermicro and Dell. You can see Dell pre-market down almost 12%. Coming up, we'll take a closer look at Kamala Harris's choice for running mate and the Democrats' strategy in battleground states. That's next, and this is Bloomberg. Welcome back, everyone. Now, Kamala Harris has formally introduced her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, at a rally in Philadelphia. Now, Walz said Donald Trump would be a disaster for middle-class families if the former president is elected again in November.
Donald Trump's not fighting for you or your family. He never sat at that kitchen table like the one I grew up at, wondering how we were going to pay the bills. He sat at his country club up in Mar-a-Lago, wondering how he can cut taxes for his rich friends.
Well, Bloomberg senior investigations writer Stephanie Baker joins us now. I mean, it's got everyone talking because there are basically two names in the running, and it's Walz, versus Shapiro, and Walz finally get it. What does he add to the ticket? And good morning, Stephanie.
Good morning. I think he adds a kind of rural, Midwestern appeal to the ticket. Obviously, she needed a white man to join the ticket to balance it out. Everyone thought she was going to go with Shapiro because Pennsylvania is a must-win state. There's no route, really, for her to win the presidency without winning Pennsylvania. But Walz came from behind. No one knew who he was. He had very little name recognition, even just a few weeks ago. And he has emerged as a very effective attack dog, taking on Trump policies in a kind of folksy manner. He exudes a kind of Midwestern dad vibe. And you saw last night, they're trying to position him as Coach Walz, playing on his history as a high school teacher, a football coach, his service in the National Guard. And, he's going to be playing defense, Coach Walz as defense for Kamala Harris, both online and social media as well as on TV.
Yeah, you mentioned social media. I think a lot of people didn't know him until a couple of weeks ago, actually, when he went on a TV show in the U.S. and just said, the Republican ticket was weird. And that went viral. So will he appeal to the youth, or does he really need to appeal to the swing states?
I think they hope he's going to appeal to those swing state voters, that some of whom went to Trump before, that he has those rural roots and can speak to those voters in a way that maybe Josh Shapiro wouldn't be able to across a number of states, despite his popularity in Pennsylvania. I think he's got a real, as you say, appeal on social media. Some of his videos have really taken off. I mean, the risk is that weird comment. The Trump campaign is going to paint that as the equivalent of Hillary Clinton's deplorables. So, they need to be careful about how they use that word.
Stephanie, thank you so much. I mean, I could speak to you for 20 minutes on this. We'll have to get you back on. Our Bloomberg senior investigations writer, Stephanie Baker. Now, coming up, Novo Nordisk shares drop after the Wegovy maker cuts its profit forecast for the year. We talk to the chief executive next, and this is Bloomberg. Welcome back, everyone. Now, Novo Nordisk shares are in the red after the maker of Wegovy lowered its profit forecast for the year. Europe's most valuable company also said revenue from its blockbuster weight loss drug was hit by higher than expected price concessions in the U.S. market. Well, we're delighted to be joined by Lars Fruergaard Jorgensen. He's a Novo Nordisk chief executive. We welcome also listeners on Bloomberg Radio. Mr. Jorgensen, thank you so much for joining us. Look, your sales fell short of expectations, but your shares, frankly, were slammed, down almost 7%. Were you surprised with how big the market reaction was?
Yeah, thanks, Francine, for having me this morning. So I'll not comment on the share price development because that's in the eye of the beholder to do that. But I would say that when you look at our guidance for this year, we're actually upgrading guidance. We're adding 2 percentage points on the top line. And when you correct for a write-down and asset impairment on our operating profit, we're actually increasing operating profit guidance by 4%. So I think very robust guidance. But the second quarter is a quarter where Wegovy came in a bit short of consensus, and that's linked partly to some adjustments in how we accrue for rebates. So we really urge investors to not just look at the quarter in isolation, but look at our confidence in the rest of the year and the upgrade we are bringing, because that's really a sign that we'll continue the trajectory we saw in first quarter in terms of achieving many more scripts in the U.S. market. We doubled the number of scripts in the U.S. market during the first 6 months. So we're confident in the outlook, but there are a few issues in the quarter to sort out.
So do you think actually what you've been hit by were one-off factors? And can you reassure the markets on that, or is it a bit too soon to say?
No, I think if you look at the development in the U.S. market, we started the year with a script count of around 100,000. We ended the first half year with doubling that, 200,000. And what we guide for is a continued, increase in that. So when you look at an individual quarter, you will have quarters where you have positive rebate adjustments, and you will have quarters where you have negative rebate adjustments. And this quarter was one where we had a negative impact on Wegovy, and that explains, I think, a good part of the shortage compared to consensus. So I'm confident in our ability to compete, to grow with Wegovy and also Ozempic in the US, and that's what is baked into our guidance increase for both top line and operating profits.
The Eli Lilly chief executive said last week that the shortage, of course, for their weight loss drug Mounjaro would soon be over. What do you anticipate the Wegovy shortage being over?
Well, we have also overnight removed the drug shortage notification for all but the starter dose, and we chose to keep it on the starter dose because that's really how we manage, a safe journey for patients. So when they start on a Novo Nordisk product, they can rest assured they can also titrate up to the high doses. So I'm really encouraged in our ability to scale to the US market to a degree where the FDA also accepts taking off the drug shortage notification. And again, look at the scripts and how we are serving more and more patients. That's really a sign of our underlying scaling of manufacturing, and the fact that we can opt our guidance for the second half, where we have a tougher comparator from last year, is a sign of that continued scaling.
But when are you expecting the shortage for the starter doses to actually lift?
Well, we are supplying many more products, so you could say that we could also choose to remove that, but we have kept it because we think that there is a good sign of responsibility in terms of patient focus by actually, in a dynamic way, managing how many patients we start to make sure that all get a good experience. But we could also, look at that if that's meaningful.
Just on the rebates, are you confident that they've actually hit rock bottom or have hit bottom in the U.S.?
So typically in the U.S. market, when you reach more and more patients and grow volumes, you do that on a lower price. For instance, we are broadening access in Medicaid. We have 20 states in the U.S. who now support use of Wegovy, and that typically comes at a lower price when you operate in the Medicaid segment. So when you expand your market access, you typically also give somewhat higher rebates. So that's a normal way of seeing a trajectory in the U.S. market. There's nothing special around that, and it's really to say that the financial guidance we give that should give investors a reassurance that there is a intact growth trajectory that we find very attractive also in the coming quarters and years, I would say.
Yeah. So the price of Ozempic and Wegovy has really, taken on a political issue in the U.S., and I think you're testifying before the Senate committee next month. So how do you anticipate the outcome of the U.S. election actually changing, your life in the U.S.?
Well, I think in parallel with the focus on the price of medicines, I think we're also building the case of stronger and stronger evidence for using it. So if you look at what Ozempic and Wegovy are bringing to patients, not only glucose regulation, weight loss, cardiovascular protection, kidney safety. We're also studying MASH, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. We are looking at Alzheimer's, etc. So the body of evidence, you can say, becomes stronger and stronger, and the value of the medicine becomes stronger and stronger. And also, if you look at what is the cost to society of obesity, the estimates that makes that cost the U.S. society $1.7 trillion, around half a trillion direct link to cost in the healthcare system and also economic activity level. So this, I think, has to be factored in, but doesn't change the fact that the U.S. has a challenged healthcare system that we all need to contribute to and make sure the patients get access to the medicines.
Sir, who do you think will be more amenable to those arguments? Is it President Trump or Vice President Harris?
Well, I think that's too early to tell. I think all politicians in the U.S. have a keen focus on the healthcare system because that's a key point for voters for good reasons. And I welcome the opportunity to testify in the Senate to explain our side of the story. I think there's been a lot of facts out there that could use a slightly different perspective, and I'll do that in September. And then I think it's really a story about collaborating to make sure that we together across different partakers in the industry work together and solve this challenge. It's not for one company in isolation to deal with.
You have a significant price premium to the rest of the pharma sector. Can you again give us an indication on how you see this developing? Do you think it's justified, given also those drugs' potential use to ease other risks, including heart disease?
Well, I'll let the market justify the price premium on our share. But if you look at, say, average growth in our sector, and then the growth that we are showing right now, growing 25% on the top line and increasing guidance for the year, I think that's clearly industry-leading growth. And I think that's because of our exposure to some very attractive disease areas and some great innovation, and also the pipeline coming and with great promise to sustain that growth in the future. So, that's what we focused on, getting to many more patients, scaling capacity, and build the strongest possible pipeline in these disease areas.
I also want to ask you, as a final question, when you look at some of all the concerns or actually talk about injected versus the injected version versus the pill, are you pursuing the pill or injected version of your compound in later stage trials?
So we're doing both. I think we have a very attractive pipeline in terms of injectable products on the market, but also a phase 3 readout of our next generation injectable coming later this year. But we also have, a very efficacious tablet-based treatment of semaglutide that is actually doing very well commercially in type 2 diabetes right now. We also have some exciting data there in obesity. And then we have perhaps a more scalable small molecule approach in an asset we acquired from Canadian Inversago a couple of years back, where we also get some phase 2 data later this year. So I think we have a very interesting portfolio where we can play in different segments with different, perhaps, say, efficacy and scalability points. But, I think it's a market where there's place for more competition. And I think what we have been doing has attracted a lot of competition, and I welcome that because this is our home turf, and I think we have the capabilities needed to stay strong in this very attractive market.
Lars, thank you so much for joining us today. It's really always a pleasure to speak to you. Lars Fruergaard Jorgensen there, the Novo Nordisk Chief Executive Officer. Now, on to geopolitics, and the U.S. ambassador to the UK, Jane Hartley, says she hopes the U.S. is ready for the prospect of electing its first female president. Now, as a diplomat, Hartley says she is hatched, meaning she needs to adhere to the Hatch Act, which actually limits her contributions to any political campaign. Now, despite the restrictions, we had a wide-ranging and exclusive conversation about the upcoming U.S. election, relations with the new UK government, and the recent meeting between President Biden and Prime Minister Starmer in the White House.
There was a huge amount of warmth between the two of them. And, a lot of talk about the special relationship, which I, of course, call now essential, because it is the UK that we look to in all of these crises that we are now facing. The Prime Minister had his Secretary of Defense and his Foreign Secretary with him, and we had Secretary Austin, Tony Blinken, obviously Jake Sullivan. And there was just a lot of appreciation going both ways about especially Ukraine and how well we had worked together and what our strategy was for the future. There was one touching moment, though, when President Biden looked at the Prime Minister and said, you know, I know you and I know where you come from. And he said, I understand, because I come from the same place. And really congratulated Keir Starmer on what he was trying to do, especially economically, in terms of lifting up the middle class in the UK, as President Biden has done in the US.
This was less than a month ago, and then everything's changed, actually, in the US presidential race.
Yeah, I think the Prime Minister was the last leader the President met with before he made his announcement that he wasn't going to run again.
And now we have a possibility of a female
Now we have a possibility. As you know, I think the President... Listen, I thought it was a great patriotic decision that Joe Biden made. And, you know, as he always does, he put country first. And that's just who he is. But now, you're right, our vice president is the candidate. And from what I'm hearing on that side, the U.S. side of the aisle, a huge amount of excitement, a huge amount of passion, especially young people. And I talk to women all the time, both here and there, and people are really, you know, excited that there may be the first female president. So I'm hatched, and I'm a diplomat, so I won't participate, but I will be watching closely.
I mean, there will probably be a lot of twists and turns in the next 4 months as we get to November 5th. What do you think the UK needs from the US right now?
What does the UK need? I think the UK needs what they will have and what they have had under the Biden administration, and they will have certainly. You know, President Biden is still being president. I mean, we look at this, what he's just done in terms of hostages. It's not like he's changing. It's not like our Secretary of State or Bill Burns. Everybody is still working as hard as ever. The UK relationship is going to be as important as ever. We need, you know, we've said before, the first call we always make is to the UK. When we were the first attack from the Houthis, the first call we made was the UK. None of that will change. And it was clear in the meeting in the Oval Office. And it was interesting who was Secretary Healy was there, and Secretary Lammy, Tony Blinken, obviously, Jake Sullivan, and Secretary Austin, and really talking how, even though there was a new government, there was going to be a continuity on what we're doing. So I think we'll see that throughout the fall.
Is the U.S. ready for a female president?
I would hope so. I'm here. I am the second female ambassador. And frankly, it's not a great track record, 2 in 200 years. But I'm hoping after me, there'll be many more. You know, I think, listen, we remember 2016. And I remember my daughter and many other young women I know just sobbing that night and that morning. I think we have come a long way, and I mean, just look at the Congress also on both sides of the aisle. Right, frankly, I mean, I just had a delegation here that was more from the Republican side of the aisle, but huge number of women, and interesting, armed services, intelligence. So some of the more important committees. I think we're ready, and I hope, you know, as we look to the future, we can tell our children that they can aspire to whatever they want. That, you know, it's only their dreams that are holding them back. And having a female president could be very important. Here, as I say, I'm the second ambassador, but I always tease Carrie Russell of The Diplomat to say that she's probably having more influence on women going into the Foreign Service than I am. But it is important. Young girls need to see, everybody knows they need mentors, but they also need somebody who looks like them that they can aspire to.
Ambassador, when you look at the changes in policy, whether Donald Trump gets into the White House or Kamala Harris, it's going to be different for the UK and Europe on security. It'll be different on trade.
Well, listen, on security, you know, and once again, I can't and I won't and I wouldn't be knowledgeable to comment on Donald Trump's policies. I think we know how important multilateralism and how important the allies are to President Biden. You know, for years, remember, he headed up the Foreign Relations Committee, and the first thing he did when he came into office was come over to talk to the allies. We see what he's done and what we've all done, but what's happened to NATO in terms of the expansion of NATO and the strengthening of NATO. And I think as we look around the world, look at Ukraine, for instance. Look even at this last hostage deal that just happened. That happened because of our allies. I mean, we were obviously kind of the point person, but it happened because of our allies. You can't do these things without allied support. And I think in Europe what's happening is not only is NATO being strengthened, but people are re-looking at how much money goes to defense. And I think that's a real positive, real positive.
Ambassador, how do you see the world changing? It feels like there are blocks, there are changes, the news flow is far greater than it's ever been.
Well, as you get every morning when you get up, there's something new that's happening. I mean, I think it's important to realize, and this is why the UK is so important, that we have shared values. We have shared values of democracy, freedom of speech, and all of us, the UK being number one, have to work together, because we also see on the opposite side of that autocrats getting together. We see what's happened with Russia in terms of Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. We see how China is now helping Russia in terms of its invasion in Ukraine. We see North Korea getting involved. So I think those of us that come from a place of freedom, democracy, rule of law, very important, have to start working together, thinking together, and working strategically, because those on the other side are starting to do that.
So the Chancellor, the first female Chancellor, actually, the UK's ever had, is also in North America right now.
Yes, I know.
Looking for investments to come back to the UK. You were instrumental in understanding some of the big American companies wanting to invest here in Great Britain. Will that continue?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I'm thrilled she's there. I think she's in my hometown in New York City. She's probably meeting with some of my friends as we speak. I think it will continue. I mean, you know, it's a little bit what we talked about before. The UK is an important investment place, partly because it's a country that shares our values. And I think as a CEO, I've had many CEOs come through here, and one of them, interestingly, explained to me, he said to me, I said, where are you investing? He said, I'm investing in the UK. And I said, why? And he said, let's think about it. I said, okay. He said, rule of law, number one. Rule of law, really, really important. Entrepreneurial people, great education system, transparency, financial transparency. And he went on because there are many more assets too. But English speaking, I guess, would be one. But he said, where else would you invest? So I think there is a huge opportunity here. I've always thought that, to be honest with you. And I'm thrilled she's in the U.S. because the U.S. companies I know that have come here are excited to come here and are looking, I think, to do more. And I think some of the new policies that Labor has in terms of, especially in terms of climate, in terms of the public-private investment piece of that, could be really exciting.
Have the riots actually shaken up, you think, the investor community? There's questions about what this means for the UK going forward.
Yeah, I mean, no, I don't think so. I think they're too scattered, too small right now to have an investment, to have an effect on major investment decisions. I do think they're sad, personally, and I do think I agree with what Keir Starmer said and what Yvette Cooper said. You know, I think if this is thuggery, which in some cases it looks like, it does have to be punished. It does have to be punished. I mean, where I think it has the biggest effect, which is sad, I've traveled all over the UK in these beautiful communities with wonderful people and so friendly, and you look at these communities, and it's their communities that are being destroyed. It's their storefronts, it's their transportation, it's taxis, it's whatever. So in those communities, yes, it's really hurting the economy. So I do think what the Labour government is doing is right.
Well, that was our exclusive conversation with the U.S. ambassador to the U.K., Jane Hartley. Now, staying with the U.K., riots and police forces have deployed extra officers and say they're ready to arrest hundreds more of far-right activists. This after plans circulated online to coverage on immigration centers later this evening. Now, the recent disorder has been fueled by online misinformation after false claims about an attacker who killed 3 young girls in northwest England last week. Coming up, Hamas names a new leader. We'll look at what Yahya Sinwar's appointment actually means for the war in Gaza. That's next, and this is Bloomberg. Well, Hamas has named Yahya Sinwar, the alleged mastermind of the group's October 7th assault on Israel, as its new political leader. Now, the choice sends a message of defiance to Israel and the U.S. and is seen as a blow to efforts to broker a ceasefire. Well, joining us now is Bloomberg Horizon's Middle East and Africa anchor Jumana Bersacha. Jumana, good morning. So what does Sinwar's appointment actually mean for Hamas and the ceasefire negotiations?
Well, certainly an act of defiance, as you say, Francine. Ever since the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh a week ago, there's been a lot of speculation as to who is going to take over from him. Some people thought it might be his deputy or at least somebody situated in Doha. In the end, they went for Yahya Sinwar, who is thought to be one of the most hardliner, radicalized members of Hamas. He is currently residing in Gaza and is thought to be one of the masterminds behind the October 7 attack, also designated a global terrorist by the United States since 2015. And so there are lots of questions as to what this means about the future of those ceasefire discussions. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has already commented on his appointment, saying Sinwar has been and remains the primary decider when it comes to concluding the ceasefire. It really is on him. And so this, of course, is coming at a crucial time for the region. Israel is on alert for that forthcoming retaliation that Iran and its proxies have talked about in response to the twin assassinations last week. And indeed, yesterday, we heard from the Hezbollah chief, Hassan Nasrallah. He gave another speech 1 hour long, saying that that retaliation will still be forthcoming to seek revenge for the killing of Fa'ad Shukr, the Hezbollah second in command. And he said that Hezbollah are willing to do it alone or with allies, suggesting that it wouldn't just be a single front if there is a retaliation, but it could come from Iran's various proxies in the region, be they the Houthis in Yemen, Iran itself, and Hezbollah, of course. And then one final comment that also is interesting that Hezbollah put out yesterday is saying that Israel waiting for the response is part of the retaliation efforts in itself. And so the fact that the whole region is on tenterhooks is part of their retaliation, as Hassan Nasrallah would put it.
Jumana, thank you so much. Jumana Bersacha there in Dubai. Now, coming up, we'll have plenty more on markets. The BOJ moves to calm investors. We take a closer look at what this means for the carry trade. That's next, and this is Bloomberg. Goldman Sachs chief executive David Solomon says he does not expect the Fed to take any emergency steps after the recent market volatility. Well, he sat down with David Rubenstein in the latest episode of Peer-to-Peer Conversations.
I think there are a couple of things that have gone on over the last couple of days that contributed to the market volatility, we've seen really since Friday. The first is the jobs report on Friday indicated a slightly softer trajectory for the U.S. economy than people were expecting. I think it's important to pull back at a high level and just recognize it wasn't a horrible job report. It was just softer than people were expecting. And employment levels still remain pretty robust. But it certainly took market participants by surprise, is what I would say. And market participants have been well levered toward a very soft landing. And I think they now discount that soft landing a little bit more than they did prior to this one reading. The second thing that happened is the Bank of Japan tightened rates, tightened monetary policy for the first time in a long time. Money has been very, very easy in Japan, and investors around the world have basically been borrowing in yen and investing in U.S. Treasuries and getting a nice carry on that trade. And based on the Bank of Japan's movement, a bunch of investors began to unwind those trades. There were a couple other things that went on in the margin. I think there were a couple of investors that were, positioned the wrong way versus volatility, and that had to be unwound. And you saw a very, very significant spike in the VIX, probably the single largest one-day move we had ever seen in the VIX. So all that created a little bit more market uncertainty and a little bit of volatility. But I wouldn't call it extraordinary by any means. I do think that we're getting a correction here after a very strong run in the markets, and that might be healthy. In terms of your question about a recession, our economists have upped their chance of a recession to 25% from 15%. All of that, I think, is a little lower than the broad consensus. My view is that the best chance as we look forward is, the economy will chug along and we probably won't see a recession, but the possibility is not zero. It's never zero.
Well, you can watch more from that interview with the Goldman Sachs chief executive on the David Rubenstein show, peer-to-peer conversations next week. Now, the yen has weakened after the Bank of Japan has sent the strong dovish signal in the wake of Monday's stock rout. Let's take a closer look at the carry trade with the MLIV strategist, Ven Ram, the one and only, I should say, Ven Ram. Ven, great to speak to you. So are we actually done with the unwinding of this carry trade?
Morning, Francine. I think that, this is going to occur in fits and starts. We are not fully done yet because JP Morgan estimates that, only 50% of the carry trade has been unwound. So I think that this is destiny postponed, destiny deferred, not completely disrupted. Now, I think, as I said, this is going to happen in fits and starts. So I think in the coming weeks, we can see periodically, if you look at the 2008-2009 financial crisis, the markets didn't fall all at once. It happened sporadically, and that is the typical pattern of how markets behave. So I think that, we should expect more volatility in the coming weeks because it's becoming increasingly clear that the Fed will have to cut rates at some point. And September is looking very likely. And as the Fed embarks on rate cuts, I think these carry trades will be increasingly called into question. So that is going to be an ongoing feature of the markets in the coming months.
So what do the BOJ deputy governor's comments actually mean for the Fed's trajectory, Van?
I think that the markets are kind of thinking that, the Fed is going to throw the whole lot at the markets. I mean, they're expecting 100 basis points of rate cuts by the end of the year, which I think is a bit of a stretch. I think that the Fed does want to cut rates here because if you look at core PCE, we are averaging almost 2.6%, which is where the Fed wants it to be. If you juxtapose the Fed funds rate against that, I mean, the real policy rate works out to upwards of 250 basis points, which is extraordinarily restrictive. So the Fed is going to come out and cut rates in September, albeit I think they are going to go at a 25 basis point pace. So 25 basis points in September, 25 basis points possibly in December. So that only adds up to 50 basis points, not the 100 basis points that the markets think will likely happen this year.
Van, what does it mean? I mean, going forward, I don't know how you lived the last couple of days. Is it something tangible that's changed, or is it just a confluence of, panic events all happening at once?
I think that, this was an accident waiting to happen because the Bank of Japan was kind of unusually hawkish at the last meeting. And I think that, it was fairly clear that given the path of real wages in Japan, the Bank of Japan was going to have to raise rates. And, those rates aren't going to be at zero for a long time. And they've moved higher. And the Fed funds rate is going to go lower. So I think that increasingly the markets are going to call into question this carry trade. So it was an accident waiting to happen.
Interesting. Thank you, Ven Ram there from Bloomberg MLIV. Now, these are some of the movers that, of course, we're watching out for in Europe. Novo shares plummeting as sales of its blockbuster weight loss treatment Wegovy disappointing investors in a rare misstep for the high-flying drug maker. I'm also looking at Glencore deciding to retain its coal and carbon steel materials business. Coming up, we have Bloomberg Brief with Manus Cranny in New York, and this is Bloomberg.